Here's a question that sounds simple, but turns out to require an uncomfortable amount of honesty to answer properly. What did humans actually eat before fire existed as a usable technology? The honest answer involves a substantial amount of raw meat, considerable mechanical effort to chew it, several food categories that would alarm a modern nutritionist, and a digestive and dental system that was, out of pure necessity, considerably more rugged than the one currently processing your dinner. Before fire, eating was not the safe, predictable activity it is today. It was a continuous negotiation with bacterial risk, mechanical difficulty, and the basic problem of extracting sufficient calories from food that heat had not yet chemically simplified. So let us walk through what was actually on the pre-fire menu, why it took the shape it did, and what this reveals about a period of human evolutionary history that receives considerably less attention than it deserves. The first point worth establishing is timing. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. The broader genus, Homo, extends back nearly 3 million years. But the controlled, routine use of fire, not opportunistic use of natural wildfires, but deliberate maintenance as a daily technology, appears to have become widespread somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million years ago, with earlier sporadic use debated, but not firmly established as routine. This means that an enormous stretch of hominin existence, stretching millions of years before consistent fire use, our ancestors were eating an entirely raw diet, not as a deliberate choice, but as the only option available generation after generation. Meat consumption is one of the most consequential dietary developments in the hominin record, and it predates fire by an enormous margin. Cut marks on animal bones, produced by stone tools used in butchery, appear in the archaeological record at sites dating back at least 2.5 million years. This means hominins were eating raw meat, by definition since fire was not yet in routine use, for well over 1 million years before they had any means of cooking it. What did this actually involve? Considerably more chewing than modern humans are accustomed to, for one. Raw meat is mechanically tough. Muscle fiber, connective tissue, and cartilage require significantly more force in time to break down compared to cooked meat, where heat has already begun softening collagen and muscle structure. This is part of why early hominin skulls show such robust jaw musculature and such large molars relative to modern humans. The mechanical demands of raw food required genuinely powerful chewing apparatus that later relaxed anatomically as cooking reduced those demands. The bacterial and parasitic risk was real and persistent. Raw meat carries meaningful exposure to pathogens, various salmonella strains, E. coli, listeria, parasitic organisms, all of which modern cooking substantially reduces or eliminates. How did hominins survive millions of years of this exposure? Two answers appear relevant. First, hominin's stomach acidity was likely somewhat more aggressive in its pathogen-killing capacity than is strictly necessary for a cooked diet, providing a buffer. Second, and this deserves emphasis, hominins almost certainly suffered genuinely significant rates of illness and death attributable to raw food consumption, absorbed as one risk among many in an environment already characterized by extraordinarily high background mortality. Organ meats were almost certainly consumed with particular enthusiasm. Liver, kidney, brain, and marrow are considerably softer than muscle tissue, requiring far less chewing effort while offering extremely concentrated nutrients. Bone marrow deserves specific attention. The archaeological evidence for deliberate marrow extraction is extensive, with cut marks and percussion marks on ancient bones consistent with intentional breaking to access the marrow cavity. Marrow is essentially pure fat, calorically dense, and would have represented an extremely efficient energy source for a species working with raw, unprocessed food. There's also a strategic dimension worth noting. Substantial evidence suggests early Homo relied significantly on scavenging, accessing carcasses already killed by other predators. This has direct implications for freshness. Scavenging species like hyenas and vultures regularly consume meat well into advanced decomposition without apparent harm, and a scavenging-dependent strategy almost certainly meant some portion of hominin meat intake was considerably less fresh than anything a modern person would willingly eat. Plant foods almost certainly represented the bulk of caloric intake for most hominin populations across most of this period, but they presented their own specific challenge: raw starch digestibility. Tubers, roots, and underground storage organs contain starch in a crystalline structure that human digestive enzymes struggle to access efficiently when raw. Cooking disrupts this structure through gelatinization, exposing far more surface area to digestion. Studies comparing raw versus cooked starchy foods find substantial caloric differences, with meaningful proportions of raw starch passing through the digestive system essentially unused. This raises a genuine evolutionary puzzle, one researchers, including Richard Wrangham, have spent considerable effort addressing. If raw tubers offered reduced caloric value, how did early hominins extract sufficient energy from plants before fires solved this problem? Several mechanisms likely contributed. Mechanical processing, pounding, mashing, thorough chewing increased surface area exposure. Fermentation, whether managed or simply incidental, improved digestibility. And, perhaps most significantly, hominins likely relied more heavily on plant foods that avoided the starch problem entirely. Ripe fruit contains directly absorbable sugars. Nuts and seeds contain fats and proteins without the same digestibility gap. This suggests the pre-fire diet emphasized fruits, nuts, seeds, and leafy material more heavily relative to starchy tubers than the post-fire diet eventually did. Insects deserve more attention than they typically receive. They offered an accessible, reliable, nutritionally dense food source, requiring no cooking whatsoever. Comparative studies of contemporary chimpanzees document extensive insect foraging, including tool use to extract termites and ants. Termites, ants, grubs, and beetle larvae would have provided a reliable year-round source of fat and protein for relatively modest foraging effort. Honey deserves separate mention as one of the most calorically dense foods available, requiring no processing at all. The challenge was never digestibility, but acquisition, given how aggressively wild bees defend their stores. There is a specific anatomical line of evidence worth examining because the human digestive tract itself preserves a physical record of this transition. The human gastrointestinal tract is notably smaller relative to body size than our closest primate relatives, particularly colon size. This reduction is widely interpreted as a consequence of cooking. A smaller gut became metabolically viable once cooking began reliably pre-processing food, reducing the digestive workload previously carried by gut tissue itself. This connects directly to the expensive tissue hypothesis, developed by researchers including Leslie Aiello and Peter Wheeler. The argument holds that the unusually large human brain became metabolically possible specifically because the gut shrank in compensation, freeing the metabolic budget a larger ape-like gut would otherwise consume. If this holds, hominins still relying on a larger gut to extract energy from raw food were operating under tighter metabolic constraints on brain size than later hominins with access to cooking. Dental microwear analysis, the study of microscopic scratches and pits on tooth enamel, consistently supports a diet involving substantial mechanical processing demands, consistent with raw, tough, fibrous food. Not all early hominins show identical wear patterns, suggesting genuine dietary specialization, even within the broader pre-fire category. Species within Paranthropus showed dental and jaw morphology suggesting specialization toward extremely tough, fibrous plant material requiring exceptional mechanical capacity. Early Homo species show less extreme specialization, consistent with a more varied, behaviorally flexible diet, a divergence suggesting the pre-fire diet was never a single uniform strategy, but multiple distinct approaches across different hominin lineages. Contemporary individuals maintaining strict raw food diets provide a useful comparative angle. Studies find measurable differences compared to typical cooked diet eaters, including lower body mass index and, in women specifically, increased rates of amenorrhea, generally attributed to insufficient caloric intake, given documented reductions in caloric extraction from raw food. This reinforces that the pre-fire diet was not a secretly superior strategy modern humans unfortunately abandoned. It was a genuinely more difficult, more costly approach that hominins persisted with for millions of years because it was the only option before fire provided a dramatically better alternative. Geographic and seasonal variation added further complexity. Tropical forest environments offered relatively consistent fruit and insect availability year-round. Savanna environments presented dramatic seasonal swings, with dry season scarcity making meat and underground storage organs proportionally more important precisely when easily digestible plant resources became scarce. This variation demanded accumulated environmental knowledge in strategic decision-making, cognitive demands that may themselves have contributed to selective pressure favoring increased cognitive capacity, independent of and prior to the additional cognitive benefits cooking would eventually provide. Water deserves attention here too, because fire's eventual arrival transformed water safety as much as food safety. Boiling kills the vast majority of waterborne pathogens. Before fire, hominins drinking from rivers and streams had no equivalent mechanism for reducing pathogen load, meaning waterborne illness represented a persistent background risk running alongside every foodborne risk already discussed. Food storage presented its own challenge. Without fire's smoking and drying techniques, meat from a large kill began decomposing quickly, creating pressure to consume it rapidly rather than preserve it. This time pressure likely shaped hominin social behavior significantly, contributing to the kind of immediate, group-wide meat sharing well documented in contemporary hunter-gatherer societies, behavior that may have origins predating fire entirely, driven by the simple problem that undried meat in a warm climate does not wait. Nuts and seeds, with low moisture content and protective shells, stored considerably more easily, giving them particular strategic value as a reliable buffer resource. Tubers occupied an intermediate position. Many varieties remain viable underground for extended periods, functioning as a natural food bank, requiring no active preservation at all. Chimpanzee behavior offers a genuinely informative comparative window, since chimpanzees represent our closest living relatives and provide an observable model of sophisticated raw food primate life. Long-term field studies document diets incorporating over 100 distinct plant species at some sites, supplemented by insects and opportunistic meat through both scavenging and active hunting, including coordinated group hunts of smaller primates involving role differentiation in meat-sharing patterns that genuinely resemble those documented in human hunter-gatherer societies. If chimpanzees, without fire or sophisticated tools, manage this level of coordinated behavior, it provides reasonable grounds for inferring early hominins were capable of comparable or more advanced strategies. What emerges from all of this is a far richer picture than ancient humans ate raw food because they had no choice. The pre-fire diet was not a deprived prelude to the real story of human development. It was itself a multi-million-year proving ground, one raw meal, one foraged tuber, one scavenged carcass, one handful of insects at a time, during which the behavioral flexibility, strategic thinking, and accumulated environmental knowledge that would eventually define our entire species were being tested, forged, and refined against the genuine and unforgiving constraints that an entirely raw world imposed.